this and we can get going. Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Jo Palmer. For those of you who I haven't met before, it's good to see some familiar names and faces in the chat this morning. I'm the founder and managing director of Pointer Remote. So we are a company that is really passionate about supporting businesses and individuals all over Australia, but in particular in rural areas, to really leverage remote work to either grow your business or to access the job market, but also working with communities so that how communities can leverage remote work to attract and retain population, to increase economic development in their area as well. So this is part of our Ask Me Anything series that we are running with pros in the area as far as remote work. And I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Bailey Bosch this morning. I will let Bailey introduce herself, but look, Bailey and I have known each other for some time now. Bailey's based in Western Australia and is a very clever chook. So I've got a pile of questions that I want to ask you as well, and some questions that came from people as they registered. And like I said, if you've got any further questions that come up as we're going along, feel free to put them in the chat and I can ask Bailey. So Bailey, give us your elevator pitch on you and life and all the stuff.
Right. Okay. Well, really lovely to be here. Thanks very much for asking me. I think it's obviously a fantastic time in history to talk about this stuff, but also it's such an important topic. So really privileged to be here. So thank you. Right. About me. So in the work capacity, I'm a psychologist. So I really I come at the remote work or just work life in general really from a sort of well-being point of view, as well as a very practical point of view. I think sometimes in psychology we can kind of get left behind in the theory and not actually move into the real world. So that's really important for me. I think we have the theory and the evidence and the understanding, but it has to work in the real world. So yes, so psychologist, with interest and specialty in remote work and sort of figuring out how we can best place people into remote work. So what are the sort of personality characteristics? What are the traits that are needed to make it that a successful transition?
Unreal. And this topic that we're talking around today, around this concept of a work-life blend, I love the word blend rather than juggle. And I think that really is key to what some of the things that we're going to talk about today. You really are a pro, not only at like the psychology side of things, but as far as the work-life blend. Bailey is 32 weeks pregnant with her 6th child. So this girl knows what she's talking about. So as far as asking me anything, I'm sure Bailey would be really happy to answer questions around what that looks like as far as running your own business, very busy household, and doing all of those things. So do you want me to kick us off with a question, or is there something that you wanted to highlight before we kick off?
No, I'm happy to get stuck straight in.
Okay, fabo. So the first thing that I, like I said, I get to have my questions first. So the first thing that I really wanted to talk about was what do you see are some of the biggest challenges from working remotely, be that from home, a co-working space, or somewhere other than a traditional office setup, from a mental health well-being point of view? So what do you think are the really important, well, the challenges, but then the responses and strategies and stuff around that?
Okay, so there's a few parts to it. I think definitely a key component is our brains are really structured to go around cues and environments and understanding where we are and what we're supposed to do in those places. And generally, once you take somebody out of an office or out of a typical professional environment and say it's back at home, or it might be in a co-working space. Co-working space is possibly a little bit different, but let's just say we're talking mainly about home. What we have there is we don't have the surrounding environment to support that mental transition into the next role. So we're sitting in a place that what we really would think of it as a domestic sphere, but we're now suddenly expected to act in a professional capacity. I think that is a key thing, that sometimes we dismiss the environment and the importance of the physical environment around us. Also, for some people, the social support of being in a group setting, whether you're in a shared office or not, knowing that there's people around or you're part of a bigger picture, that can really make an impact in terms of the feelings of isolation and loneliness. And even people can start to question their competency because they think, well, there's nobody here to check on me. There's nobody here I can sort of use as a stopgap. How do I actually know that what I'm doing is correct? You know, if you've got long periods of time between check-ins with managers, for example. So those kind of thoughts can creep in as well. Am I even doing the right work? Am I doing the right thing? And then, of course, you know, let's just put in the actual reality of it. Some people don't want to work like that. And particularly in recent months, if it's been forced onto workers, that brings a whole other, you know, set of problems, especially when you then add into the mix family at home. And like, you know, you've mentioned before we started recording, having to share workspaces with perhaps your partner who's also working from home. So it's quite a multifaceted a situation to really sort of pull the bits and pieces apart from it.
So, well, going straight on that, so that I'm touching on that point where you talked about that sort of almost that you're in what is traditionally your domestic side of brain/life. Have you got any I don't know, little tips or hacks for people that can help with that transition? I know a lot of the individuals and organisations that we've been dealing with over COVID-19, but also prior to that, is that how do you transition from work to home when you're doing this thing, this remote work thing? Like, have you got any tips about how people can sort of put some boundaries around it, or make that transition between the two, I suppose, more of a solid line so that life doesn't blur into work and vice versa?
Yeah. Okay, so again, the realities of everyday life have to come into this. So there's certainly the tips and the tricks, but that doesn't always mean it translates into the real world. Again, for example, you can have boundaries in place, you can have set work hours, you can have a part of the house that's dedicated to this, and you can do all these other little bits and pieces that we can talk about. But if you've got very young children at home, well, it's kind of too bad, you know, that those boundaries aren't always maintained, or it becomes very stressful to maintain those. So there's also the flip side of the pressure people put on themselves to really have these strong boundaries. Everybody's saying you need boundaries. That's how you can demark the different roles that you're doing throughout the day. But also we need to sort of cut ourselves a bit of slack, because you cannot always maintain the boundaries when you've got especially young children at home and you're trying to you know, you've got no other options but to have them there under your care at the time you're trying to work. So having said that in mind, there are, as I said, environmental things that you can sort of tweak to try and get your identity to shift into the different roles. So for example, if you did have a place of work in the house, that would be really excellent if it stayed as that place. So not moving the laptop around with you and taking it onto the couch or putting it in the kitchen, or you know, sometimes you'll have to. For example, I have done a whole lot of work sitting in the trampoline because my 2-year-old can't fall out of the trampoline. So I sit in there with the net around us. Sometimes you'll have to do it, but if you can, stay in one place, keep that environment set up that as you go in there, those cues, those environmental cues are saying to your cognitive system, this is work, this is the role that we're going to do now. It also could help if there's, again, playing on the environmental thing, if there's something that you can do physically. So for example, I think I've mentioned this in some of the tips that you've put out through your newsletters. You can't leave work if you don't go to work. So have some kind of ritual around going to work. So I've worked with people who will go out their front door, walk to the letterbox, pretend they've come in to start a day's work and sit down at their desk and do, a couple of hours of work. When work's finished, there's a sort of ritual of that. It might be, pack away some papers, shut down the laptop, something in the environment that triggers to you, it's work's finished now. And also, in and of yourself, you could put on perhaps a work jacket, or change the different, if you wear glasses, put your different glasses on. Just trying to manipulate your environment. Another really great one is to put shoes on. So, being barefoot signals or symbolizes relaxation, sitting on the couch, putting your feet up, sitting back. And again, especially if you're sitting with a laptop on the couch and then you sit there and you put your feet up and suddenly you're lying back on a pillow and, I should really be doing this. And it's so much more tempting to watch Bluey and just pay attention to the kids. Put your shoes on, because putting feet on the couch with shoes on becomes a lot more difficult. And it just puts you in that frame of mind of, okay, this is work now, and I'm trying to make some superficial boundaries as best I can to sort of mark out professional and personal.
Yeah, that's so good. I was talking to a friend of mine who when she clocks off, she puts the apron on, and that's also a signal to the kids as well. So the apron being on means, okay, I've got mum hat on now. You can come and ask me questions. You can I can actually engage, and work is finished now. That's some really good tips, because that, I feel, can be a challenge when you're not physically, and especially if you don't have the privilege, I guess, of having a home office where you can shut the door and leave work. I think that whole concept, though, of packing the laptop down, moving it to the side. I've got another friend that actually will lie a tea towel over all of the work at the end of the kitchen bench, so you're not physically looking at it, and that temptation to jump back into work doesn't happen later as well. So that's an interesting one. Thank you.
Just to add, there's a couple of points there as well. Kids respond so well to this. If you think about it from a kid's point of view, it's a very obvious, and especially we spend a lot of our time on our phones for recreation, or looking at iPads, watching shows. They don't always know that when you're on a device, you're working. So to make it very clear and make it as easy as possible for kids to understand, visual cues work excellent. They really respond to that. And the other thing as well, I love the idea of the tea towel over the work stuff, because often we are doing work amongst the rest of the house. If you actually wanted to get serious about this, you could set yourself up a bit of a timesheet. And every time you go sit down at that laptop, so you have, like the kids' chore chart, for example, you start writing on there, okay, sat down now, 10:15, got up, or whatever time it was. And I think a lot of people would be staggered at how much time extra they're spending working than they would if they were in a sort of more structured, traditional workday. Employers fear remote work because they worry that their employees aren't going to do the task. They think they're going to slack off. Generally, what we find, it's the complete opposite. We have burnout from people who are working from home, people who are working remotely, because we lack that structure. The clock doesn't mean as much as it does when you're at home compared to when you're in a workplace. Physically, things change. Other people start leaving. Outside starts getting busier as people start exiting offices and heading towards trains or whatever. You start to see all of this stuff. When you're at home, the temptation is, well, I need to do this work, let me just do it. And the burnout risk is actually higher for people working at home compared to those in an office. So if you could set up some kind of timesheet, just keep an eye on how much you're working, because you certainly don't want to add burnout to all of the, the rest of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. We were talking offline about it. I had a very similar situation when we first started lockdown, and I work remotely. I've run my company remotely from the start. Like I'm used to doing this. I run workshops on how to do this, but those boundaries for myself had generally still, I had like daycare and preschool and school pickups and things that still put some physical boundaries around my day. But when those were removed, I worked out that I'd gained 10 and a half hours a week that I wasn't driving from the farm into town, to bus, to piano, to ballet, to all of these things. And instead of doing something nice like read a book or go for a walk or actually hang out with my children, I found that I was doing another 10 and a half hours of work a week. And I burnt myself out during COVID. Like, it was exhausting that I'd snuck another whole more than a day's worth of work into a week.
Yeah.
And those boundaries weren't there. So I very much have started doing a lot more of these visual cues. And like you said, the kids have really reacted well to that as well, because they know never to come into the office when the door's shut, but also they are then like, okay, mum's back on now when I come downstairs. And the shoes off is a really good one as well.
I think it also puts it makes it clearer to you as well, because you have to live up to those expectations of the kids. You are now in mum mode. So because of that, it helps you switch off as well, because you can't, you sort of owe it to them. Yep, you've done the right thing while I've asked you to, stay out when the door's shut, etc., etc. And now I'm suggesting to you that I'm on like family duty, and it stops you then I'll just dash back and quickly finish something because your kids are occupied for 10 minutes. I think it really helps discipline us as parents, as family members, to turn off. That's it. You've told the kids, you've told the family that you're off duty. They're going to hold you to account.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, another question for you. Is there a difference when you have more time and opportunity to plan your work-life blend versus being thrown into it like what's happened with the pandemic? You think that if you could rewind the clock 6 months, okay, let's do that. Rewind the clock 6 months pre-pandemic. What is the sort of advice that you're giving either business owners or individuals who are doing this remote work thing for the first time, or transitioning to this, or doing it in a hybrid way? What are the sorts of advice that you give to people when they're not doing it like our poor Victorian friends are doing at the moment and back into that lockdown situation?
Yeah. Okay. If there was no COVID, again, there would be a different answer. Given that we're saying that we're coming into a pandemic, what can we tell people? What can we change? It's really around the expectation management. Working from home isn't the same as working in an office, but you're just doing it from home. And I think that is really a key point to remember. Again, the saying gets thrown around quite a bit that it's actually not business as usual. It's not. Work isn't the same, but it's just done from a different location. That's a complete, let's not buy into that. When you buy into that, you have the same expectations of your output, your productivity, your effectiveness in your role. You bring it into an environment at home where you've got children at home, you've got the stress of, perhaps you have elderly parents or relatives that you can't go and visit. There's a million other things you add into the mix, but you're still expected to work as you were in an office environment in a normal, in a normal period of history. We need employers to understand that, but we also need the workers themselves to understand that. And that's not just of their own, their expectations of themselves, but it's expectations of team members as well. It gets also very difficult when you start adding in the combination of people who don't have children, for example, or people who don't have, especially in the real height of the lockdown. Some people found a lot of solace in their work and they really hammered it. They overworked to sort of keep themselves occupied. You then put that against a team member who physically cannot. They've got children at home. They're supposed to be doing homeschooling. They're supposed to be doing their work, or they've got very young children that need physical care. It's not always compatible, people's expectations. So I think if you were going into it with a bit more planning and preparation, it would be really spending the time communicating what their expectations are, and also people being honest and open about what they can and can't do. I think sometimes, especially as mums, we don't want people to think that we're not capable, or we don't want to feel we don't want to jeopardize our career prospects by suggesting we've got any kind of weakness or we've got any kind of propensity to be overwhelmed. No, we can handle it, we can do it. And so you go into these situations with these massive expectations on yourself. You don't speak up, so people think, oh well, you must be handling it, you're still doing the output, you're still doing all the bits and pieces of your job that you're supposed to. But they don't see behind the scenes. You're physically falling apart, you're emotionally, socially, everything is heading towards burnout and absolute overwhelm. The relationships with your children are getting strained, your family relationships. So we have to be honest about expectations. I think if you were coming into this with a bit more planning and forewarning, that is where I would focus on.
So with that in mind, if you then, we picture a post-COVID world where we'll look from our experience, what we're seeing at Pointer with a lot of the organisations we work with a lot of the individuals we work with, what we are seeing is that a lot of organisations are seeing this as, okay, that was really intense and really hardcore, and that's not how we would have done this in a perfect world. But in a perfect world, let's be honest, we didn't even consider it beforehand. But we're seeing so many organisations that are seeing that there were some real positives from this, and there were silver linings, and there were things. And so moving forward, they really do plan to integrate some of these things into what the new, like, business as usual looks like for these organisations. Have you got any advice for individuals, and business owners? We've got both people watching this. Say, to start with, for individuals, advice on I guess negotiating with organisations, or sort of what could they be doing to almost cherry pick the bits that were good and then present that as can this now be how my life or my work looks? Like, have you got any advice on how to sort of negotiate that, or to get that sort of clear?
I think what you say is absolutely correct. Some organisations that would never in a million years have considered this as a feasible way of working, and have now really had their eyes open to the benefits of it. So there's obviously the commercial side of it. So in terms of presenting your case, if I've understood the question correctly, presenting the case to your organisation, for example, if you want to start working more in a remote or flexible capacity, absolutely the key place to start is the commercial argument. And that really centres on, well, we've shown you that we don't need to have that expensive office space. We don't need to be taking up that seat. Again, there's the sustainability argument as well. It's better for the environment. People aren't commuting. They're not having to heat and cool and do all the electricity and power, etc. with the office places. Let us work from home. So there's certainly that commercial aspect, especially if an organisation has had a good experience with the corona, for the forced remote working from a corona point of view. Just also to add there, some places have had an awful experience, and they're going to now go forward saying, well, it's because of remote work, or it's because of working from home. Absolutely not. It is from simply not being prepared, not planning. And in some senses as well, and this is, I suppose, where a lot of my work focuses on, you don't have the right people in the right jobs. So again, coming to the question about from an individual's point of view, just be 100% sure that this is how you like to work. If it's flexibility you're after, it's not necessarily a requirement that you work from home. Sometimes we can be tempted thinking, well, if I could just work from home, I'll solve my, whatever the stressor is. It's not always the location of work either. So don't think that just because you work from home, you'll solve, or, it's the golden ticket. Flexibility can come in many, many different forms, and it isn't focused on just where you work. So from an organisation's point of view and an individual's point of view, know yourself, know exactly what the problem you're trying to solve is, because until you do that, you can sometimes band-aid over situations. If you don't actually get to the nut of what the problem is, it can seem really tempting. Oh, well, if I could just work from home, that would fix everything. Same from an organization's point of view. You know, if we could just get people working from home, we could save money. Well, yes, you might, but then you might have more problems in management. You might have more problems in performance management, and productivity and output. So that could be a false economy as well. Key message would be, if you're going into this in a structured and planned way, which wasn't possible before the pandemic, but now we're looking to the future, really start thinking about it and giving it deep analysis on what type of jobs can be done remotely or flexibly, but also which type of what people would best suit those particular positions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that band-aid of thinking that it actually could be underlying communication issues or management styles not working with how someone works, and that just if I'm removing myself from the physical situation, that communication may magically improve. Or yeah, that's really interesting. I've just got a question here. What are the mental adjustment issues for those forced by COVID to work at home, but then having to return to the office back to normal? So that transition when, like, okay, right, we're all back in now. What are the adjustment issues that come with that? So almost pretending that it never happened and let's just come back in.
Well, I think key to it is acknowledging that there is an adjustment period. So it's never going to be just a smooth, all right, let's flick the switch now, we're all just back into work, especially when you add into the equation the anxiety some people feel. Some people don't want to go back into a workplace from a health point of view, especially if they have to commute in public transport, or they might feel that their workplace doesn't allow for adequate social distancing. You then add anxiety or health anxiety into that mix. So absolutely there is mental adjustment that's required. From a point of view of trying to find, I suppose, the benefit of it, if you can perhaps think what it is you are going to miss from working from home or working flexibly, but what you're also going to gain or benefit from working back in an office. And if you can give yourself a little bit of a time to reflect on that and say, all right, well, some of the best things were, and whatever they were, how can you build that into your everyday working life? So it might be, for example, that if you take the reverse of it, you might have overworked when you were at home. So as you're going back into the workplace and you're trying to make that adjustment, is being mindful and open to, well, there's actually some positives here. And the positive is, once I turn up at 9 o'clock, whatever it is, I'm working, and then generally, and it's something we should aim for, when I leave at 5, whatever, that's me done for the day. That's a really positive. And that will require some mental adjustment too, if you're used to somebody who's worked at any sort of patch of time they could just to get things done, because that was how you had to work at home. So if you can keep some kind of reflection list going, what can you take from the best of the experience, and from the worst of the experience, how can you try and adjust your working life and your home life to try and negate those negative experiences?
And I guess that list can also become something that maybe you get back into that office 5 days a week, or whatever that looks like. If you're making notes on these things and reflecting and actually drilling down into that really honestly, that can be something that you take to your manager or your boss and say, like, look, is there some way we can negotiate a hybrid model where I'm in a couple of days a week, some days from home? Like, these are the real positives that I saw. I found I was really productive when I got up at 5 a.m, did my yoga, went for a walk, got up, knocked out an hour and a half of work before the kids got up. And is there some way that I could be doing that? Or is it, like you said, not all flexibility has to be remote. It might be that you actually adjust your work hours, and that actually becomes a 10 a.m. into the office and leaving at a later time, or keeping your leaving time the same, but you're doing more hours before you go into work. I think that's a really interesting point. I really like that. Oh, sorry. There you go.
I was just going to say, if you want to look at a sort of umbrella approach to the question around mental adjustment, we're really talking about resilience training. So when you go back to work, as we've seen, there's a possibility you might have to go back home again. We might be back into the lockdown situation. So it's really an absolute period of time when resilience is coming forward as one of the sort of protective or the golden skills that we really need to have during this time. So, and it feeds really nicely into the question around mental adjustment. So the really good news about resilience, of course, is that anybody can learn it. It's not a talent. Some people, you can say, oh, you know, they're a real tough cookie, they were born that way. Well, perhaps, but also the evidence really tells us that you can train in resilience. So resilience being a muscle, being a skill that you can develop. Everybody can benefit from some resilience training during this time, because yes, you might make the mental adjustment to go back into your workplace, but should you be sent back home again, you really need that flexibility, that agility in your own thinking, in your own emotional response, to be able to cope with whatever whatever this year is going to throw at us that's, you know, yet to be seen. If you can work on your resilience, it gives you a lovely protective a safeguard against, regardless if you're going back home, you're going into the workplace, those adjustments become a lot smoother if you've built up your resilience.
Yeah, and I guess that list that you've collated as far as the positives, and that can almost be a reference point to refer back to, I guess, as well. So that's a really interesting point. Motivation to work and not being easily distracted by social media, sunshine, dogs and kids. How do you stay on track? Do you use a time tracking, work for 30 minutes, relax for 10 minutes or things? What are your hacks around actually managing your time and managing actually to get something done?
Okay, so firstly, I like to think of why I'm not motivated. So if you can take it back one step before you get to this, oh, I'm not motivated. Well, why is it? Is there a particular reason that I'm putting off this task? What will it mean when this task gets completed? Or what will it mean if I don't complete this task? So there's always the understory of why you're not doing something. So yeah, if you can really sort of try figure out, well, why don't I want to do this particular task? If there's something that you really don't want to do, but it's essential to your everyday job or just running of your life, it always helps if you can get that done first. You know, that's sort of and that's a very, you know, common thing that people suggest. Knock that thing off first so that you kind of get it out the way, so it's not hanging over your head and tarnishing all the rest of your day. In terms of motivation as well, you have to realize that motivation isn't enough. You can't rely on motivation to get things done, because if you do, you'll be sitting there for the rest of your life waiting. Sometimes motivation just simply will not come. So I like to think of, if you start a day, instead of having a goal for the day, you have a rule for the day. So goals, you can kind of change around and you can play around with them, and I don't actually want to do that anymore, so I'm going to adjust the goal. And you almost think of a goal as something you need to be motivated to do. If you forget about having a goal, but you just say the rules for today are, and then it might be like you say, if I work for 1 hour, I can relax for half an hour. But that is an inflexible rule that once you do it, what you're trying to do is you're trying to remove. We're very lucky that we've got this brain that can think and can change and can have free will, but it's an absolute pain in the bum sometimes. So you need to work how you can work with trying to master that brain to say, look, there's no option here. If you go to a traffic light and it's red, you stop, end of story. I don't have to keep thinking about it. It's not even an issue. Very much like parenting in some senses, everybody knows what they can tolerate and they won't tolerate. So there's the nagging factor that eventually you'll give in and say, fine, just like, what did I have yesterday? Wanted 2 packets of cough lozenges of all things at the checkout, and having this absolute carry on. Fine, you have the cough lozenges. But if it was something like, I want to go across the road by myself and I'm 2 years old. End of story. No, the rule is you're not doing that. Try and make it as easy as possible for yourself to stick to it. And when you start to call it a rule, it becomes really easy. It's not open for negotiation. I have to do my work between, I don't know, again, you've got to work around what's practical with kids at home. Between 11 and 12, that's when I'm working, end of story. And it gets to 11 o'clock. Yep, I know this is the rule for the day. It's not a goal. I'm not aiming to have done 2 hours before lunchtime. It's just a rule. I have to do it before lunchtime. In terms of the tracking or the time tracking, there's some sort of evidence as well that if you can bunch tasks that are similar, you can get them done, and the success on the first task leads to that feeling, that sort of positive reinforcement that you continue on with those tasks. So depending on the type of work you do, if you can kind of batch the tasks that are similar, at least get 1 or 2 done, then it builds a bit of momentum in tasks that are very similar, and you're not requiring that cognitive switch between 2 different types of thinking or 2 different, some stuff's very easygoing admin, or others is deeper level work that requires a lot more thinking. Try batch them together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really loving the concept of calling it a rule. I think you've just changed my life with that with that comment there. I think that's something that I'm very much guilty of, and I'm really good at planning, at organising and things. But you're right, our brain is so good at giving us get out of jail free cards, like, oh, but you did such a great job at that, so you know what, let's just leave that till tomorrow, and you put that on there. But making it a rule, like the just the terminology around it, I think that's a really, really interesting strategy. I like that. Thank you.
Well, I think, it comes back to the environmental cues. Sometimes we can dismiss the simple things and we're trying to chase these amazing, solutions and strategies. But sometimes it's very simple things like changing the word that it's just a rule, or putting your shoes on because this is what a normal working person at a desk would wear. I wouldn't go into my workplace with my bed socks on. So sometimes we can dismiss the simple things because we're sort of chasing the more, it must be better because it's complicated. Well, not always.
Yeah, really, that's really interesting. What are some of the tools or systems that you use to help you stay in control of multiple responsibilities? So all the hats you wear.
Right, great question, because when I hear that question, it makes me think of adding stuff to my already busy life. What apps can I put up? What systems can I learn? It's that, to me, sounds like hard work. Underlying my approach to everything is actually removing stuff from my life. I think rather than trying to add systems and add processes, remove things. Once you can get clear on what's essential and non-essential, or what's important to you and not so important to you, it really gives you some structure around what you tend to focus on. And we are never going to do everything perfectly. Like, let's go back to that expectation management. For example, for me, I actually don't care about ironing clothes or even folding up kids' clothes, for example. But some things that are really important to me might be, I really want to put proper stuff in the lunchbox, for example. If I'm filling the whole lunchbox with pre-made snacks, I feel bad about that. That's just me. So if you know yourself and you know where you can take a shortcut or a cheat, like a cheat sheet, know that and use that to make things easier. So you're taking stuff away from your life, rather than, well, I have to be the perfect housekeeper, I have to be the perfect cook, I have to be the perfect mother at getting the kids to every curricular activity that they want. Figure out what's important to you and then take away what you don't want. A really massive thing, and I'll try to condense this because it's a whole conversation in and of itself. You need to readjust your relationship with time. Now, in the past, they used to talk about time as I'm sure everybody's seen that quadrant, the urgent and important and not urgent, not important. You put your tasks into the quadrant and you focus on those that are urgent and important. No, what you can talk about is multiplying time. So people say, oh no, that's just a nonsense. You're blowing my mind. How can you multiply time? The way to multiply time is to create systems in your life where you ask yourself today, what's going to save you time tomorrow? So like compounding interest is to money, creating systems for your time is very much the same thing. So as I said, sorry if it sounds so crazy, and I would like to talk about it in a bit more depth, but an example to try and illustrate it. I can do quite a lot of things pretty well, but one thing I never got on top of was the washing. It would be on the couch. It would be you name it, there'd be washing there. So I thought to myself, okay, I have all these plans like, okay, on Saturday, I'm going to get the washing done. And then fine, I might have got it done, but by Sunday morning, I'm back to the same situation. So I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I'm honestly living my life on Groundhog Day with this washing. So what I did was I had to think, what can I do instead of sitting there folding it on the Saturday? What can I do to make it that on the Sunday, I don't have to do it? So a really obvious thing occurred to me was, well, if they don't have the clothes, they can't wear as many clothes, they can't dirty as many clothes, they can't wash as many clothes. And then if they need them, they have to go to the washing pile to get them rather than just go, oh, well, there's some more in the cupboard. So the washing pile was never getting put away because nobody had the urgent need to go to the washing pile. So I got every single item of clothing in the house, put it on a table, divided it up into all the different people. And I basically thought, well, what can fit into one drawer? So, those big nappy change tables, it's got eight drawers on 4 and 4, nappy change on the top. Now, all the clean washing is on top of the nappy change drawer. And if it belongs to you, again, I haven't got to the point of folding or ironing or anything. I take it with my hand and I put it into a drawer underneath the top of the nappy change table, and that's it. If your clothes don't fit in the nappy change drawer, they get put in a box and I put them up in the top of the cupboard to rotate, if someone tears a t-shirt or whatever it might be. Uniforms, okay, I keep obviously got to keep spare uniforms, but for everyday clothes, I've just got rid of them. I've just said, I need to make a system that will buy me more time. And by eliminating the problem, which was the total, oversupply of clothes, I've now got a system where if someone's wanting clothing, they've got to go and get it themselves off the top of the drawer and either wear it or put it in the drawer underneath themselves. So it's about what can you create in your life to save you more time tomorrow. And for me, that I'm hoping symbolizes or explains what I mean by multiplying time.
You've just changed my life. Like literally, I am just thinking that is exactly, I'm like, I only have 2 kids and I do washing every day. And I thought I was being super snazzy that I would put the washing on in the evening, set the timer so that it would finish in the morning so I could hang it out and then get the day going. But you're right. Like, they don't need as many clothes as, oh my gosh. Okay, can you please give me another one of these examples again? Like you're about to welcome child number 6 into your what seems to be super cruisy life. You don't even see any wrinkles on your forehead.
Okay.
Forehead.
I don't know if this is going to hit home with anybody, because sometimes, as I said, it's the simple, small things. But I've had a lot of situations where I'm about to walk out the house and someone will knock over a glass and it will break on the floor and I've suddenly got to pick up glass, or they'll knock a bowl and the bowl suddenly shattered everywhere and, oh God, everybody don't move because you've got no shoes on and you can't be trusted. Strap her into that chair while I get this glass cleaned up. And I'm supposed to be somewhere. So what I did was, everything now is like melamine plastic type of bowls. So any child who is wanting a vessel to either eat out of or drink out of, too bad, sorry, it has to be plastic. Adults can sometimes occasionally go into the special cupboard and get a proper glass. But what I just did was, and it's a very small thing, but I'm just trying to put the idea forward, is I looked at what was causing the problem and tried to get rid of it. So the problem was I can't clean up quick enough after you. I can't get those breakfast dishes cleared. I'm not in a position to remove every single plate that's left over on the table. So what I can try to do is harm minimization. You drop it, it's not going to crack everywhere, and I'm not going to spend like 20 minutes trying to clean up glass. Just small things that have to be very personal to your life and to how, you know, you got to look at where you're spending your time or where your massive annoyances are. I try to operate from a principle of zero tolerance. So I'm not trying to fix over a problem. I'm trying to totally remove it from ever happening again. And it's better for my stress, it's better for my overwhelm, but also it saves you so much time because you're not doing the same thing every time, which is fixing the problem. You're just getting rid of it. You know, this is another example. Forcing kids to go to sports or activities they don't like. I spent a whole lot of years doing that. Now you don't want to go, fine, we're done. I'm not forcing you, but understand that this is the last sort of opportunity you've got. And if you don't want to go, then I'm not going to force you. How much time, how many arguments, how much, you know, bribery to get in the car because we've got to be there at a certain time. That's one really good thing that's come out of the pandemic, I think, for a lot of people, is it's made us see for ourselves, but also for our children, what do they actually want to do? And do they miss it, or do they? I mean, you know, some of my kids are absolutely, without the sport, they were just desperate for it. But other things that they would do, they didn't care. They weren't fussed either way. So why am I spending the time and the effort and the money not forcing them, but thinking that that's what they should do or that's what would enrich their lives, when it's only stressing all of us out?
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's been a big takeaway for my group of friends who have said exactly that. Like, I spend my life being the taxi, doing all of these things, but I'm the one who signed them up for it. And after just watching the kids in lockdown who are actually really clever at entertaining themselves, and that's free, and that requires zero driving and carting around of children, that, yeah, just reining it back in. Look, I had a very tough love mother, and we were allowed to do one extracurricular activity a term, but there was none of that. If we didn't like it, you got dragged kicking and screaming, because I have parted with my hard-earned cash to pay for you to go to that, so you are going. But then again, if there was the dummy spits, you literally didn't get to do that ever again, and that was you done. Oh my gosh, Bailey, like, that is next level. I'm really, really impressed with those, like the clothes. Holy hat, that literally.
Well, you know, you do the same thing with the toys. The kids that are prepared to pack the Lego away and stay in one place with it, they can have Lego, but all other toys have to be bigger than my hand, so I don't like step on it and crunch it under my foot and get stabbed by sharp little Barbie legs, or, you know, anything like that. Everything has to be quick and easy to pack away. I don't want millions of tiny little things. And again, the kids don't know any different.
Yeah.
If they have like a box of, you know, I don't know, 10 or 15 toys to play with, they don't know that there's like 2 or 3 other boxes up in the cupboard. They don't miss it. So rotate them. You know, people are always passing that tip around. Bring a small amount of toys out, pack the other ones away, and then they get the chance to go choose some new ones. They think you're the best in the whole world because you've got them new toys or they've got something new to play with, but it's just seeing it with fresh eyes. We have, you know, it's tied in with the consumerism. We have so much stuff that's actually burdening us and it's overwhelming us. Try to reduce some of the stuff as well, and you'll go a long way to you know, reducing the overwhelm.
Yeah, it's so interesting because that strategy of when, like, you're removing the issue or the problem before it even begins. Like, I know with our business, I do a lot of things where it's repetitive tasks. I find that if I'm doing the same thing and it's not something that really me with my managing director hat should really be doing, I have got into the pattern and the routine now of I record my screen, me talking to the camera, doing the things, but then we store it in our intranet and someone else can do it. That task does not need to be done by me, and I remove it. And I'm good at doing that at work, but that's a really I've always spent trying to get this blend thing better, that I do a lot of the focus on trying to streamline the work side of things. And I've sort of just like treated the home stuff as like, okay, well, this is, you just lump this because this is how home goes. So that is a very big takeaway for me today, is that same attitude I really, and those systems and processes need to be getting applied to the home life as well.
Just to put the word out there, because we've talked a little bit about how words are important. Just remember that if we're not blending it, we're bleeding. So there's a work-life bleed. If there's not a nice blend, it's a bleed. And if you've got a weak boundary, you're going to have bleed between it. So it's exactly what you're saying, and you've just presented an excellent example of how you multiplied time. You recorded yourself doing it once, and you've bought yourself time down the track because you don't have to explain that to anybody again. Sometimes we can feel guilty being working parents and trying to have a family and a career. So why not take the best of your working skills, your working strategies and systems, like you say, and apply it into the home? And then you can get the benefit from it. And then it can kind of, sometimes when you're having those moments of thinking, oh, I should be a better parent, or I should, those expectations that we have, and when we start to feel guilty, say, well, working's actually helped me because I've developed skills that I can now apply and put into the home to benefit all of us.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to round it out on that, because praise be to that. I feel like it's a beautiful way to finish off. Bailey, thank you so much. That was really fabulous, and I hope everyone watching and listening has got some really great takeaways from that. Very, very, very impressed. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. Just don't be surprised if you only ever see me and my kids in the same clothes.
I love it. And drinking out of plastic drink bottles when they're 18 years old. Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.